Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty incredible. We're going to piece together almost minute by minute the final, chaotic 24 hours of Hitler's life, all thanks to some newly discovered documents.
I mean, for decades, right? The story of how the Third Reich actually fell apart was just a black hole. It was all rumors and speculation. The main players were dead, and everyone just assumed any real evidence, any documents were just gone, turned to ash.
But it turns out that wasn't the whole story. A set of documents, found much later, totally changes the game. It gives us this incredibly clear, almost claustrophobic look into those final dramatic days. It's like we finally get a minute-by-minute peek behind the curtain.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at what these documents and other evidence really tell us about that final countdown. And it all starts with the incredible story of how this stuff was even found in the first place.
Okay, so picture this. It's months after the war is over. A French commandant, a guy named Raymond Rose, actually goes into the ruins of the bunker. And what does he find? A stack of papers. The very papers Hitler was so sure he had destroyed forever.
So, with that discovery in mind, let's rewind. Let's go back to the final 10 days of the war and really set the scene. We need to understand what it was like inside this concrete tomb, where not just an empire, but the man at its center was completely falling apart.
7 meters. Think about that. That's how deep underground the Fuhrer bunker was. Just this fortress of concrete and steel, buried right under the middle of Berlin. It was designed by Hitler's own architect, Albert Speer, with one goal in mind: to be totally, completely bomb-proof. But here's the thing. This was no grand command center, not at all. It was a depressing, suffocating tomb. Imagine it. Cold, damp air, these tight, claustrophobic hallways. And on top of all that, this constant, droning noise from the ventilation system. It was basically a form of mental torture for anyone stuck down there.
And inside this tomb, the man in charge, Hitler himself, was just falling apart, physically and mentally. He had Parkinson's disease, and his left hand shook so bad he had to hide it in his pocket all the time. He looked way, way older than he actually was, and he needed daily injections of vitamins and glucose just to get through the day.
It's kind of poetic in a dark way. His physical decay was a perfect mirror for what was happening to his Reich. Here's a guy who dreamed of dominating the world, and now he's trapped in a couple of damp rooms. His entire empire had shrunk to the size of this bunker, while his armies were getting wiped out right above his head.
Okay, so that's the physical setting. Now let's get into the human drama, because this is where it gets really intense. We're talking loyalty, betrayal. As the end got closer and closer, you really started to see people's true colors.
And in Hitler's inner circle, you basically saw it split into two extremes. On one side, you have the unwavering, almost bizarre loyalty of his mistress, Eva Braun. And on the other, the just audacious betrayal from his chosen heir, Hermann Göring.
We actually have letters from Eva Braun that were found after the war, and they paint a really clear picture. Here's a woman who was absolutely committed to staying no matter how scary or isolating it was. She insisted on being in that bunker. For her, being there was the ultimate proof of her loyalty.
And then you have Göring, a complete, stark contrast. He's the head of the Air Force, Hitler's designated successor, and he sees all this chaos as a political opportunity. He figures Hitler's trapped, he can't lead anymore, so he sends this incredibly blunt telegram that basically says, "All right, I'm in charge now."
You can imagine how that went down. For Hitler, who was already paranoid and just crumbling, this was the ultimate betrayal. He just flew into a rage, stripped Göring of every single title, and ordered him arrested immediately for high treason. His inner circle was literally imploding.
So you've got this perfect storm, right? Total military collapse happening outside, and this intense personal betrayal happening inside. It all just sets the stage for the final, absolutely frantic act of the whole regime.
And what's so weird is that this chaotic, messy end was carried out with this strange, cold, almost procedural precision. I mean, think about it. A wedding, then writing a will, then a double suicide, and finally a cremation. All of that happened in about 38 hours, while you could literally hear the battle raging in the streets just above them.
And if you look at his final will, which he dictated just hours before he died, his motivation becomes crystal clear. At this point, it wasn't even about ideology anymore. It was about pure ego. It was all about avoiding what he saw as the ultimate shame,
being captured and publicly humiliated.
It gets even darker. To make absolutely sure the poison would work, he tested a cyanide capsule on his own dog, his beloved German Shepherd, Blondie. Once he saw the dog die, he knew the pills were good to go. After that, he shot himself, and Eva Braun bit down on one of those cyanide capsules.
You see, he was completely obsessed with controlling his own narrative, his own legacy, even after he was dead. He was terrified that the Soviets would capture his body and parade it through Moscow like some kind of trophy. So his very last act was an attempt to literally erase himself from the world, leaving absolutely nothing behind for his enemies.
But this plan, this final act of destruction, it created one last huge mystery for the Allies to solve. Because he almost pulled it off, he had nearly succeeded in just vanishing.
So when the Soviet Red Army finally storms the bunker, they go out to the garden where the bodies were burned, and all they find are these charred remains. So now they've got this critical problem. How do you prove to the entire world that Hitler is actually dead?
Well, the answer wasn't DNA, it wasn't fingerprints, it was a tiny little object that somehow survived the fire. The investigators, they managed to track down his dentist's assistant, and she had his dental records, which perfectly matched this unique piece of bridge work they found in the remains. Bingo, it was a positive ID.
And here's the ultimate irony, isn't it? A guy who apparently hated going to the dentist was, in the end, identified by his teeth. The one piece of himself that he couldn't destroy became the undeniable proof that he was gone.
And it just leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Without that one tiny golden bridge, would all those conspiracy theories have just run wild for decades? Would one of history's most infamous villains have become more of a myth than a confirmed historical fact? It's a pretty fascinating thought to end on.